Are now officially live. Welcome, everybody. I see that the chat room is brimming with individuals. I notice a lot of people have jumped in there. Morgan and Jonathan and Ben. Chris Frala. How is it going? The Plastic Deserts here, not perfected yet. Somebody named Joe Darlington from Being James Bond is there as well. Look at the people here. Unbelievable. Well, welcome everybody. I hope you can all hear me. If you can hear, just, give a little waggle. Don't give a waggle. That sounded awful. Give me some sort of clue that you can hear us all. That's the most important thing. And then we're going to get underway because you guys all came here for a book club, from what I've heard. Let me kind of go backwards a little bit and talk about the inspiration for why we're all gathering today and why this wonderful panelist that I'm going to introduce you to came together. First of all, hashtag Fleming Reading Challenge. This was something where came together very organically over a discussion in another type of gathering like this, where we thought, something, we talk about fitness challenges and we talk about the movies and we talk about delays. Boy, do we talk about delays. But imagine if we could all gravitate around the novels, the very things that started this from Ian Fleming, and we've been going one by one. And today is arguably everybody's favorite, Moonraker. And it wasn't enough for me to come to the table. I wanted you to all come to the table to provide comments, information, questions, hell, even debates, because this should be a little conflicted. The best book clubs, when they're in person, of which unfortunately this couldn't be, are a little bit of agreement, disagreement. What do we embrace? What do we push away? All right. So, like I said, I can't do this by myself. So I do have a group of panelists here that I'd like to introduce you to. First of all, I'd like to introduce you to Mark Edlitz. Mark, welcome to this craziness.
Hi. Thank you very much for having me. And I'm very happy to be here with this group of panelists.
We're happy to have you. Now, Mark, help us. For the horribly uninitiated that don't recognize what's over your right-hand shoulder, what is your little corner of the Bond world, and what do you do?
So I wrote a book called The Many Lives of James Bond. It was actually my second book. My first book was called How to Be a Superhero, which was interviews with 35 actors who played superheroes over the last 7 decades. I did an interview with Roger Moore in that, even though he wasn't technically a superhero, just because I was a Bond fan. And I was like, well, let me write a book about James Bond, but there's so many books about James Bond. What could I do differently? So my book, The Many Lives of James Bond, looks at how the character was created in films, novels, comic books, comic strips, video games, audio dramas, radio, and the like. And so it was interpreting the character through all these creators. And that's my favorite thing about Bond, is the character. There's people who like the clothes, there's people who like the lifestyle, there's people who like the drinks. My favorite thing is sort of narrowly the character. And the other thing that the book does, which is kind of cool, is it's a lot of interviews with actors who play James Bond, but not just the ones you think of, not in addition to Lazenby and Moore. It's, the radio Bond, the video game Bond, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, good. You're going to be bringing a lot to this conversation because you've been marinating this. And I think some of the people in the chat are saying, obviously, they recognize your name and your book. That's a good thing. We're gonna move over to Thomas Ryan, who is in a newly moved place. So thank you for carving out the time to do this. But Thomas, you've got an interesting background as well. Could you share that with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Thomas Ryan. I'm a writer, director, filmmaker, commercial director, and film lecturer. So my whole life is based around movies, movie making, and a huge part of that is my love for Bond. I love absolutely every aspect of Bond, the books, the behind the scenes, the clothes, the whole shebang. So I'm a big admirer of all you guys. I'm really honored to be on the panel here. I've made 2 movies, 2 feature-length films that have traveled the world. They're available to view on Amazon, Trampoline, and Twice Shy. I'm currently writing and directing a Irish language kids TV series for the BBC. And yeah, I do a lot of commercial work then in between. So
And
it's
Thomas
just such
said
a pleasure to be here and talking about Bond.
And Thomas also said, and I'd like to say this publicly, that if I brought you on the show, that you would put me in one of your movies. So generous of you. So very generous.
Well, I'll have my people talk to your people.
I don't have people, so that's not going to happen. All right, moving on. Some guy wandered in off the streets. It's hard to pronounce his name, but he has joined the panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, you know him, you adore him. Calvin Dyson, welcome to the book club.
Thank you very much for inviting me on, David. I'm really happy to be here. As like Moonraker is just one of my favorite aspects of Bond, whether it's film or book. So I'm just happy to be here chatting about it.
What would you say wins? I mean, just out of curiosity, because we are talking about the book today, but you know, in a fight, in a duel, you know, ripping off shirts, what would win, the film for you or the book?
Oh, that is tough. They're such different beasts. That is really tough. Oh, I want to say the film because it has sentimental value, but in you know, if I was to sort of, you know, go objectively and sort of think, yeah, actually, which of these would win, then the novel Moonraker is a much stronger fighter, I would say.
Well, good, because for a second there, I almost had the delete button just poised perfectly, but we're going to pass on that. Now, Calvin, I'm going to start with you on my next thing, but I'm going to jump in here because part of the book clubs is some people like to have a libation. I don't know why. Passes the time away. Maybe it's the time of the night. I've created something, and Calvin and I have created certain drinks back and forth. I'm not saying we're dueling or anything like that, but I'd like to introduce everybody today to something I call, it looks like lemonade, the Moonraker. It is called the Moonraker. And the reason I call it the Moonraker is the ingredients. First of all, it's in a carafe. And Bond does drink vodka out of a carafe. It is vodka based. I did use No Time to Die's Smirnoff, as a matter of fact, but it's the ingredients. So it is lemon, because he has lemon peel. It is a splash of soda to represent the champagne he drinks, a little bit of brandy because he drinks brandy, and icy cold because he drinks it icy cold. But the biggest thing that's in here, which I think Culture of Bond will appreciate, it has a pinch of pepper to collect the fusel oils, of which there are no fusel oils. So I do not even know what this crazy concoction tastes like, but
yeah, I can't wait to see your face. Oh,
no,
there we go.
That was like a Scooby-Doo, right, Ralph? Like, it's actually absolutely delicious. I kind of knew it would be because lemon, brandy, and vodka, like, can't go wrong. Ooh, wait, there comes the pepper. Just a little bit of pepper. So it's an interesting drink, but Calvin, what are you drinking? It looked very red.
Yeah, well, I've gone very sweet, actually. I've gone for Prosecco and Chambord, which is like a French, I'm not even sure what it is. It's some kind of cherry-flavored liqueur. So it's kind of a cocktail, I guess. It's two alcohols mixed together, so I think that counts as a cocktail.
It definitely counts. And do you have like a pitcher? Because usually you do. It's not just usually one.
I don't actually. I did get the biggest sort of champagne flute that I could find. So yeah, maybe I'll be pacing myself today. I don't know. I had some comments in the chat the last live stream we did. It was like, oh, Calvin's on his fourth already, 90 minutes in.
Oh, you know what? People don't count that. First of all, he's not driving anywhere. All right. He could just fall asleep on the, it would actually be great TV if you fell asleep during this panel.
Yeah. No, well, anything can happen.
By the way, people are saying that I need a sliver of cucumber in mine.
Oh.
So, but hey, it's all good. Mark, Thomas, are you drinking anything? And it could be coffee, could be water.
I've got a giant cup of coffee. Keep me alert.
You're going to need it.
And I'm going to join you guys on the booze, and I have a whiskey.
Oh, nice.
Oh, that's a nice glass.
Well, thanks very much. Yeah, that's a good glass and a good whiskey. That is a Redbreast 12, one of Ireland's best whiskies. We've got plenty of nice ones, but that one is my favorite at the moment. So,
nice.
Yeah, that's
and Bond drinks whiskey in Moonraker. In the novel, he drinks a Hagen Hake with a little bit of soda. So you're in good company. All right, we're kicking it off, folks. Now that we've done all that wonderful housekeeping, everybody buckle up. It's going to be a crazy ride. Roland Hulme in the room. Sprinkling the pepper on the vodka is something I picked up from Moonraker. Yeah, it's an interesting taste. It's got a little bit of pepperiness. And being James Bond says, should we bruise the cucumber? Joe, you bruise whatever you want, including your neck. So it's 1954, ladies and gentlemen, and a trip to Jamaica ensues, where Ian Fleming and his wife Anne head there for 2 months, his usual annual vacation when he writes his book. And he does his usual process of writing for 3 hours in the morning and then 1 hour between 5 and 6 or 6 and 7 at night. And he comes away with Moonraker. But interesting little bit of note that will, and please, people in the chat, let me know if you knew about this or not. But Moonraker started out as a screenplay. Yes, Ian Fleming wrote a screenplay at first, and then it wasn't quite long enough for a novel. So that's when he added the card game and the Blade section. Now, first of all, panelists, who knew that?
I would call it more of a, from what I understand, it's more of a treatment as opposed to like a formatted script where he typed it out at the. So what happened was that there was a producer in England called I'm going to mispronounce his name, Alexander Korda, who produced The Third Man, which John Glenn, Bond director, was an assistant editor on. And I think that's correct. I know he was in the editing department. Maybe I'm wrong about his title. And Bernard Lee had a small part in. Anyway, so
I think Guy Hamilton was involved in that as well. Sorry to interrupt. I think
was Guy Hamilton in it as well?
Yeah, I know that he doubled for Orson Welles in some of the scenes where they're like running through the. Yeah, it's like him with the coat on, like running through. Really? Yeah, in some of the scenes.
So he had this exchange with his producer and about Live and Let Die, the previous book. And the producer said, well, I think, he's like, I love the book. I'm not sure that our company is going to make it. I think that the best movies come from original ideas as opposed to adapting a book. So he originally wrote this, as David was saying, as a film treatment specifically for a film. And he didn't think that there was enough meat on the bones, as David was saying. So he added the whole other first half. And he said that he's not sure that it feels like a cohesive book, that it feels more like two halves.
But right. He was reluctant to when it was published as well, wasn't he? He said he was quite apologetic about it and said that it makes for a better movie. It would make for a better movie than a book.
Well, it just shows you that at an early time, he was thinking about ways to turn Bond beyond the novel, that there were the radio dramas and the Daily Express. He was already thinking about the television ideas. He was already thinking about, this is not just a character for novels, this is something for all media, which is very forward thinking on his part.
Yeah. And I love, that the screenplay thing is interesting. And Calvin, I want to go to you with this one because, we've got Thomas calling in from Belfast. We've got Mark and I coming from kind of the New York, Philadelphia area. You are London. So I'm going to ask you, because one of the things that Fleming did seemingly purposely is really play on the pride of Britain, but also the fears of Britain, meaning, you've got literally in the 1950s, there was fear of rockets, rockets as this new thing and fear of Nazis, and Germans and things like that. First of all, going back to this book, it's all in Britain. I mean, what was that like for you? And what was like, thinking about all these fears?
I kind of loved it. And I know that it's often one of the sort of more negative aspects that people read into it is that it doesn't contain the usual jet setting, Bond often goes to some kind of exotic place. And I understand that there's some escapism in reading that. I love that Moonraker is set in England and it's specifically in like the Southeast in like Kent and London and that kind of stuff. And it's like, oh, wow, no, I know like when the Bond and Gala Brand down by the White Cliffs and everything. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, I know exactly. I've been to those places and I can sort of relate to it. So I do get something more out of it personally in that respect. To what you were saying about kind of playing in some of the attitudes of the times, like fears of, Nazis and rockets and all that kind of stuff. I think that really, it's in like one of the first few chapters where Bond is sort of talking about Hugo Drax having built this massive sort of what is essentially a nuclear deterrent, this Moonraker rocket. And he's sort of talking about him and he's really excited and he's like very like admiring of Hugo Drax. But it's quite like reading that now, it's quite jarring to have, someone be presented as a positive figure for having created a weapon of mass destruction. But at the time, that would have been seen as like this fantastic defensive thing, and so close after World War II as well, and all of the horrors that brought. So I thought that was all quite interesting.
Yeah, and Thomas, there's another theme that goes on that was explored by several writers that talks about this fear of what they call, or Fleming called, the traitor from within. And this became kind of like a regular thing of Fleming of, you've got this, relatively nice, almost seemingly embracing partner in collaboration who's not a partner at all. What did you think of that theme in the story?
I love it. And I think that sort of plays off of his experience in the Secret Service, that don't trust anyone. I think Fleming had that sort of a cold edge to him. He was a little bit suspicious of people who he came across, and I think that he wanted to put that into the novel and have Bond have that sort of trait as well as a character. And it's good. It's a bit of a spy trope now at this point. It's a bit of a cliche, but it originated with authors like Fleming, like Graham Greene as well, author of The Third Man, even John le Carre. And I just love it. I think it's a fantastic trope of the genre, and it keeps the reader on their toes as well.
I agree. And Joe Barron in the chat room is saying the personality of Hugo Drax, for example, in the book reminded me of Elon Musk. So we probably do that as a matter of habit. Is when we read these things, we think about who are the people that may be that perfect Hugo Drax. Mark, did you do that? Did you put it in today's time as well when you read the book?
I didn't. He's got such an interesting face, the way Fleming describes him with the hair and the mustache, that I kept on thinking about, how he was depicted in the Daily Express and in fan art. When they made Die Another Day, the Gustav Graves character is sort of a quasi Drax, where he's a beloved figure of the nation who is thought to be this great guy, but actually has sort of nefarious things going on.
And they even have a Blade scene in that movie with Gustav Graves.
Literally.
So talk about the comparisons. I do like what you're talking about with the description, though, because, and I know we're jumping right into the character, but Hugo Drax, the way he was described, first of all, when I'm reading this and they talk about werewolf, how cool is that? But the thumb sucking, especially, I mean, of course, they talk about the red hair. Poor Roland Hume on here has got a YouTube thing, around, being a ginger. His words, not mine. But the whole some thumb sucking in causing, what was it called? Dysteria, where it's like the teeth jut out. I mean, Ian Fleming loves to put those physical aspects on his villains. I mean, Calvin, that's become part of the whole Fleming Bond aspect, wouldn't you say?
Oh, it completely has. Yeah. And again, I think some of that is playing into a part of what you would see in the world, in London, for example, like so close after World War II, where a lot of these people came back from war with these kind of, disfigurements, if you will, or like missing limbs or whatever. And so it's kind of playing into some of the, it's taking those things and using them in a rather villainous way. But it's still playing in some of those like real life horrors. And I think, Fleming will do this in almost all of his books. I think there's always either some kind of physical or, mental imperfection, if you will, in all of his villains. But yeah, it's
Bond. Bond is scarred in Fleming's writing as well.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
Which is always interesting to notice, something that the films discard, but Fleming has that in there, that Bond is a scarred hero.
Yeah, I think Fleming actually embraced, maybe even appreciated scarring and imperfection in general, because many of his women, have something that's not quite right. I mean, there's always the, protuberance and, the butts and the breasts and things like that. But, Adriano 17 has a really good point that I want everybody to address. And Mark, maybe we'll go to you with this, but he says, he asks, who else loves the introduction to the book? So now we're going to get into the plot and the story, but who else loves the introduction to the book and the glorious game of cat and mouse at Blades. Did you like that?
Well, the introduction of the book, the reason why Moonraker is my favorite or second favorite Bond novel is because of that first chapter, the first chapter and the last chapter. The first chapter tells you everything you'd want to know about Bond's day-to-day work and his personal life. It's filled with so much juicy detail. You know, For Marshall of Love, when we get to books down, it has a dossier that the villains read, and you sort of wonder, are the villains reading the actual, is this accurate information, or do the villains have bad information? And then the same thing in You Only Live Twice, where there's the obituary, which in both cases you assume Fleming is trying to give information to the reader, but how much real information would the villains have and would M make public in an obituary? So what's so great about this book is that third book in, it gives you everything you want to know. It tells you about, you know, his office is on the 8th floor and his Mondays are filled with paperwork, and there's more paperwork on Mondays because everyone's out on the weekend, you know, getting into trouble of all sorts. And then he goes through all the dockets and, you know, puts a little 7 next to his name, and he keeps dockets that he's going to share with the 00 agents. It talks about his desk. There's 3 phones on it of 3 different colors. There's the black one for outside lines. There's the green one for internal, and then the red phone for M. Talks about how much money he makes, and which wasn't a lot. It was like 1,500 pounds, which is roughly 35,000 or so, you know, for these days. Plus he gets, you know, 1,000 tax free. Plus he when he's on assignment, he can spend whatever he wants. Plus he gets a fortnight break. So it sort of goes into how he spends his day, and then it also gives you so much information about his personal life and where he lives, what he drives. It introduces us to May, his Scottish housekeeper. It talks about how he spends his weekends. You know, he plays in his days. He plays cards. He plays golf. He takes care of his car.
Mark, you're literally reading the book to us. Did you know that? But by the way, Q Branch Media agrees with you. He says, I loved reading all the details. And some people are saying, and I think this is exactly what you're saying is, the first 2 books kind of had a cardboard cutout of Bond as this hero. This one turned him 3-dimensional.
And it almost reads like it is the first book in the series in a lot of ways. Like, I feel like it's more of an introduction to Bond as a character than the previous 2 books. Like, particularly, this is my second time reading this, but coming back to it, I was quite taken aback by like how much, like exactly what Mark was saying, you know, how often he even has these big missions. I think he says he has like 3 or 4 a year, something like that. And then he gets 2 weeks off afterwards. And that's all really interesting, I think. You know, it's not just he's going straight into M's office at the start of the book. We do have all of this backstory there as well.
Calvin, you nailed exactly what Brendan Collins Baritone, by the way, great name, sounds like a Bond name, is saying. He says, I love that unlike movie Bond, literary Bond only goes on these adventures once a year or so. The rest of the time, he just has a boring office job and he hates it. And it makes him a little bit more commiserative of our own lives and
relatable.
Relatable, yeah. Absolutely.
I think it was a conscious choice from Fleming as well to stretch his muscles really with writing the opening of this book, because like Mark said earlier, it was a treatment. It was like a non-stop action story from the second half of the book onwards. That was what the treatment was. Fleming was writing this as a movie in the hopes of making a movie. And I think that with the first 2 novels, with Casino and Live and Let Die, you know, he did get a bit of slack off of his peers. He was hanging around, you know, these circles, these social circles with fantastic writers, absolutely amazing writers who weren't writing spy fiction. So I think that Fleming really had to push himself because, you know, they do say that he was getting some sort of snooty remarks from Anne Fleming's friends from the social circles he was in. So I think that he wanted to push it away from just being solely action adventure and to add a lot more depth and character to Bond.
Thomas, you
I think
hit
it
upon
works.
something that they're saying in the chat room quite a bit right now, which is the fact that even though this book represents an amazing swell of pride for Britain, and even talking about the whole thing of like winning in Blades and having that as a win for Britain against Hugo Drax, the one thing that they dwelled upon, it seems like the critics, for example, was the two vices that Ian Fleming loved to go to, and that is gambling and the drinking and the drugs. And I want to read something because I love this. This is going to be the only thing I read today, I promise everybody. But what I love about this is what Bond consumes in one evening. Bond consumed a vodka martini, a carafe of vodka shared with M, 2 bottles of champagne, a brandy, which he also mixes with a quantity of Benzedrine and amphetamine into a glass of champagne. So all of you out there giving Calvin Dyson shite because he's drinking a little bit in this book club needs to step back and close the mouth. But, it is interesting because it makes him fallible. I mean, Thomas, this is not a superhero. This is a fallible person.
Definitely, yeah. And, by the sounds of what you've just said there, he's a lightweight, really, isn't he? At the end of the day, if that's all he has.
All right. So are you taking shots and now I'm not seeing it? Because I expect you to finish that bottle, good sir.
No. No, I think it's great to have to kind of bring that character down to earth a little bit and ground him and just show, how much each mission just robs him a little bit of his soul, of his humanity. He knows that he needs these drinks, he needs these drugs, he needs these vices to just sort of numb himself a little bit, I guess.
And in a way that almost makes him more relatable as well, because it's like, I'm sure we've all needed a bit of Dutch courage and, a strong drink before some particularly, stressful event or, for nerves or whatever. And I like that not to the extent that Bond goes in this book, having to have, Benzedrine and all that kind of stuff to play cards. But the fact that he has to consume all of these narcotics in order to perform the way that he wants to perform, and it's not just like a God-given gift that he can just switch on and go with. I found that quite interesting and not something that I think we've ever seen in the films. Actually, I think that's a very Fleming element of the character.
Yeah, Moneypenny in the.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry, Mark. Go ahead.
Daniel Craig said that he was playing it as if. So Calvin, what you said. So it's never stated, but Daniel Craig read it. And he's like, well, I'm going to play some of these scenes as if he's on some drugs. So, yeah.
Oh, interesting.
That explains a lot. Moneypenny in the chat. I'm going to get that for that. Moneypenny in the chat says that he battles his own demons is what I love about Bond. And I do love that too, because even when he's getting prepared for Blades and he's going over the different card techniques and the card shark aspect, and he's going to cheat. He is going to cheat. Let's not forget that. He does battle with the fact that he feels like these are insurmountable odds. And I love that because you're not going to get that in the movie, which is, I've rediscovered this as part of reading these novels, is that, Bond really has a lot of conflicting and big doubts that the movie version doesn't have.
It makes for a far more interesting read, I think, doesn't it? To have a Bond who's fallible and a Bond who's more human, more relatable. And, it all pays off in that wonderful line at the very end of the book where Fleming sums up Bond as a silhouette. He's just a silhouette to the world. He's the tough man of the world, the secret agent. And, he has to take so much in his stride in order to be good at his job and do what it is he does. I think it makes for a really interesting read.
I agree. Thomas, since you're warmed up, I want to ask you a question that we talk about on these panels is sometimes when we're reading these books, because we've been born and raised around the movies, sometimes we envision a particular actor saying them. I mean, our vivid imagination of this panel and even the chat room is obvious. For example, with M, I don't know about you, but I saw Bernard Lee.
Bernard Lee, yeah, it has to be Bernard Lee, yeah.
Did you find the same thing?
Definitely, yeah. Bernard Lee, Lois Maxwell from Moneypenny. I was even, God, you can still play Michael Lonsdale in your head as Drax, I think. He had that furry face, that fuzzy face that Fleming talks about. But with Bond, it's very hard to read Fleming's Bond and picture any of the actors in that role. I just get the kind of the John McCluskey, the comic strip version.
That's what I do too.
That's
I get John McCluskey's comic strip, and he's sort of my Bond. I was reading some kind of hero, and they said that James Mason was originally going to be Drax, but there were like deals with France, and so they needed a French actor. So that as an aside. But you know what you're saying about picturing Simon Vance, who's read all of the audiobooks for Fleming, Gardner, you know, the whole he read them all up until a certain point. I don't think he's read any of the more recent ones. But so he's been the audio book on tape for like $35 or something. I'm wrong about the number. But he does the same thing. And when he plays a character, he'll come up with a visual picture for each character, and that will be his visual reference. And so he'll come back to that. So when M appears at the start of the novel and the end, he's drawing on that same visual image. And he said that his voice might if you put the two audio tracks together, they might not sound the same, but that's what he's drawing from, which I thought was really interesting.
That is good. And Daniel Howes in the chat room says he too imagined a bit of James Mason actually within the book. So it's like it's something that gets implanted in there. And I do, since Bond is introduced to Drax pretty early on, and it's that traitor or enemy within, I do want to talk about Drax a little bit more, because there is discussion in this chat room, probably on this panel, and certainly off this panel in articles, that arguably the written Drax is probably one of the best Bond villains. Let's discuss that. Let's debate it. Let's argue it. Calvin, what do you think? Out of the books, is he the best Bond villain written?
Is he the best? He might well be. I can't think of anyone that I think has a greater impact. And there's also the fact that, you know, the Drax in the movie is not the same as the Drax on the page. So he is this entirely, you know, original Bond villain on the page, which I think is quite nice, because it's like, obviously the film actors do take the characters to, you know, their own level. Dr. No, for instance, even though it's based on the book. So I do like that Drax exists purely as this original Bond villain in this work. I think he's one of the best because he's so, I mean, we've already talked about some of like the physical disfigurements and all that kind of stuff. So physically he's quite striking. Also, in terms of his personality, he's so like boorish and just like a bit of a brute and quite un-British in that way. He's very kind of, you know, Fleming almost writes him like he writes a lot of Americans, like sort of, you know, slap on the back and that kind of stuff. And he also talks about, you know, how much he sweats and all that kind of stuff. Fleming loves talking about how much characters sweat. It comes up in so many of the books. So yeah, I'm one for Team Drax on this one. I think he's great.
Mark, what about you? Yeah. Best Bond villain? Why?
He's certainly up there. There's something so grotesque and over the top about him. I think I prefer Blofeld. I would probably win, but I think that part of that is, I'm saying it might be colored by the films and the importance that he has in the films. But so yeah, there you go.
Well, Michael Poplawski says this, best Bond villain could be he's over the top, which is what you're saying, and someone you can despise for his treatment of people. He's a guy that would mistreat and does the waitstaff. Thomas, Hugo Drax, best, worst? Tell me why.
Yeah, I never would have considered it before until you asked the question, but I do think, yeah, he would be the best out of Fleming's villains. I think that you get a real sense of joy reading about his description of Drax, like Calvin said. I think that Fleming's having so much fun writing Drax. He's a sort of a villain, an over-the-top villain in a book that's played straight. And that's a really kind of cool thing for the villain. Also, the movies come back to him a lot. The movies, not only do they have Gustav Graves, who's probably the clearest influence that he's had on the movies, but also the backstory for Alec Trevelyan in GoldenEye is very similar. He's someone who wants revenge against the English, with the way his family was treated. I think that the fact that he's an upstanding citizen of the world as well is sort of similar to Dominic Green. Like there's plenty of Bond villains in the movies that I think draw from the character of Drax. He's more influential than we think, I guess.
I like the fact too that with Drax, I mean, for me, I think he is one of the best, probably in the top 3 for Fleming's written villains, because we go on a journey with him. You know, we see his elation, we see his frustration, we see his, relationships. But the other thing is too, and I have to love this, it's his reason of why that I call it. I think every good villain that's written by an author answers the question of why. Why did they do what they do? Now, you could say that he did it because of a stock market play. I mean, he's trying to make a lot of money, but he's doing it for revenge. I mean, just for the sole sake of revenge in many cases. Even that point where Bond and Brand walk back in after the cliff was supposed to kill them and fall on them, and they interrupt their dinner, and his fork is like halfway up. And I love how Fleming writes this. You hear the plop of the food. You know, you understand the shock of this individual. And I love that Fleming was able to put the reader into the villain head and not just into Bond's head. What do you think? Am I crazy?
No.
I'll let that
agree,
marinate for a little bit.
I definitely agree, because in comparison to Drax, you have, prior to this, you would have had Le Chiffre, you would have had Mr. Big, and Fleming definitely doesn't go into as much detail with them. They are just out-and-out villains. I think that with Drax, Fleming does try and make him somewhat sympathetic and have the audience understand his point of view, where he's coming from.
By the way, not a lot of love for Elon Musk in the chat room. I mean, there are some serious. You guys don't like Tesla cars? Tesla cars are great. They make no sound whatsoever. Sorry, Calvin. What were you going to say?
I was just going to say, in terms of, and I kind of mentioned this a bit earlier on, about how Drax is introduced to the reader, and it's mainly through this passage with Bond and M, and Bond is sort of recounting what he knows about Drax, and he's talking about him in this very admiring way, and that's something that we don't see all that often, that Bond is actually, you know, I don't know if I go far as saying a fan, but he certainly admires him greatly. And he's like, oh no, this is a great man doing great work for the country. And that kind of, even when he finds out he cheats, it's still kind of, and him and M go on the mission to kind of, find out if he is cheating and how he's cheating and all that kind of stuff. It's still in the back of Bond's head, that, and for M as well, it's like, oh, this guy's a public figure who's doing something really great for the country. We almost need to find out whether or not he's cheating to save him from himself as much as for, like, you know, the embarrassment of the club and all that kind of stuff.
So we have a question for the entire panel. Thomas, we're going to start with you. It is from AJ Chowdhury, who arguably started, I know he would be humble and say he didn't, the hashtag Fleming reading challenge, but he was certainly the spark behind the explosion. So his question is, how much is Moonraker thematically a rumination on being British? And with recent films borrowing elements from the book, why is Moonraker still so resonant? Thomas, why don't you go first? It's a big question.
That's a fascinating question. Well, I can't speak for what it's like being British, but yeah, God, I don't know. I think I need a bit more time to think about that one.
Calvin, Mark, who wants to jump in?
Calvin,
Yeah, no, I can go with that. This is something that I feel is in all of Fleming's work, and I feel it more than anywhere else in the Bond scenes. The over Britishness of it, and the superior relationship to Bond and all that kind of stuff. How Bond perceives M's pauses, how M is presented as this very sort of like typically, you know, very stuffy sort of English figure who, you know, we just don't talk about emotions. No talk about anything like that. And it's like, even for M, because he's effectively the first like whole segment of this book is M basically asking a personal favor for Bond, and how that's kind of, he's always quite embarrassed about it, you know, that he's having to ask this. And obviously there's the whole setting that it is in Britain. It's Bond saving London. I think it's probably the biggest of the stakes in the books up to this point. Certainly all of London could be destroyed if Drax, you know, all of London could be destroyed by an ex-Nazi. It's so kind of, yeah, it's pulpy in a lot of ways, but I think it does probably play into a lot of anxieties of the time of Britain specifically, I guess.
Mark?
Yes,
Great answer, Colin.
he saves Britain. I mean, he saves England. That's what it's interesting because it's a really great question. Bruce Fierstein, who wrote a bunch of Bond movies, was talking for my book. He was saying that that in American adventure stories, you'll have like the hero talking to the president. And they don't have that in Bond movies. It's not about as it relates to the films, it's not about the government. He's often at odds, Bond, the character in the films, is often at odds with the government. But here in the novel, he's clearly a dedicated instrument of the government. He is not at odds. He is not really bucking the rules. He's following orders. And his relationship with M, unlike the films, as Calvin was saying, it's a very, he's very sensitive to all of M's emotions and feelings. He really wants to please M, which is another thing that we don't really get from it. But it's so fascinating for me to see that relationship and see how it's paternal, and getting a present from him at the end means so much to Bond, and going on this mission for M means so much to Bond.
Yeah, and there were two Britishness, there were a lot of S's involved. Things that really came across to me when Bond kept repeating millions, millions, and millions. It's that whole sense, and I think this is very British. And I'm gonna give everybody a compliment that lives in Britain. This whole cohesiveness of togetherness, and I know what you can say about divisiveness now today, but certainly that pride, as a group. But the other thing was the whole pride in the rocket. I mean, before the rocket was seen as a destructive thing, even Helga Brandt, was like so swelled up in this is so great for the country and it's so great for Britain. And, that whole idea of being tasteful and together and cohesive, I thought was very British. But Thomas, did that give you enough time to make an answer?
The stakes.
What's that?
Sorry, can I just add that the stakes are so much higher, not only because of the rocket, but because Bond has loved ones at stake here. We're introduced to May, we're introduced to Ponsonby. We know that he's got a good relationship with M. They're friends. He's friends with Tanner. The threat is so close to home now that it's not the lives of millions of faceless people at risk. It's the lives of people in Bond's life, which
Thomas,
I think makes it really fascinating.
You opened up a can of whoop ass. Get ready for this. It's such an Americanism, sorry. But I thought the one thing that I enjoyed in Casino Royale and Live and Let Die, and I found lacking here, which was totally fine, because I found they fleshed out Bond better, and they fleshed out the villain better, and even to some extent the henchman. But in the other books, I found friends of Bond, what I call Bond allies, were better fleshed out. You had Valance, and you had a couple of ancillary characters, but I didn't think that they were great, the allies of Bond, except for Helga Brand, which we'll get to in a second. But what about the allies of Bond? Talk to me about them in your impression.
Well, in the previous books, the allies of Bond were just passing through his life. He never knew if he was going to see Felix again on another mission. Once they part ways at Casino Royale at the end of that, they're not going to keep in touch. But with the allies of Bond in this book, in Moonraker, they're people who are integrated into his day-to-day life. So, whether he wants to admit it or not, he does care for them. He does love them. We might not find them as fascinating as some of the other characters in some of the allies in the previous books or in future books, but they are the core of Bond's day-to-day life.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I think he even is sort of touching about like his 008, his colleagues who are sure they're 00 agents and they're spies and they're glamorous, but he's sort of he's worried about them. He's worried about 008 and 011 and how are they doing? Did they get back from their assignment? Are they okay? And Fleming goes into his Ponsonby, I have such a hard time pronouncing these things. I just see them on the page.
I
Lil.
butcher them worse than you, so you're fine.
He calls her Lil. I'm going to call her Lil. And Fleming goes into even though she only has a few pages, you get into how she feels about these three men, these three agents that she works with. She's the secretary, as everyone who's listening to this knows, she's the secretary to these three spies. They all share her for her duties, and they talk, and you really get to know her a little bit through Bond's eyes and through herself. So I think she's a wonderful character who hasn't been depicted in the films because nobody wants to see. Although this first chapter is my favorite part of maybe anything that Fleming's ever done. Although I love quantum, the short Quantum Solace. But where was I going with this?
Nobody wants to see that opening on the movie.
Thank you. Nobody wants to see that in the movies, but it's so.
Although I will tell you something, not to jump into the movie land, but I've always said to people, I've been very vocal about it in public, is that I love the little moments, even in the movie franchise. Those little moments, like in Live and Let Die, when he's making, a cup of coffee or espresso. I love that because it fleshes out the character and makes it, as Calvin says, more relatable to me. Jack Lugo, for example, has a great point and a question. Says, is Ian Fleming's ethnocentrism something that holds the literary Bond's relatability back in any way? So it's I think those little moments that he serves up, like in the beginning, make it relatable, whether you're South African, American, British, it almost doesn't matter. You can put yourself into those relatable situations.
Oh, yeah, it's the horrible grind of a Monday in the office. I mean, who doesn't have
know
nightmares
that?
about that,
Exactly. Thank God it's
everyone
Saturday.
can relate to it, yeah.
Calvin, you're going to kick off a conversation for us. Prepare yourself.
Okay.
You may want to take a sip. We got to talk about the Bond girl. We got to talk about Helga Brandt. And it has been written by Raymond Benson in an article. His opinion is that Helga Brandt is one of the worst written. Argue or defend that statement?
It's Gala Brand, isn't it?
Gala
Yeah,
Brand.
no, it's
it is.
Yes.
Sorry, I was
Welcome to this show.
I thought I was on the You and Live Twice, but not that Helga Brandt's character in that book either. But well, that's interesting, actually. I mean, because for me, I mean, I flat out, I don't think Fleming writes women very well anyway, and they often kind of fall into, his two categories of kind of, they've either got a lot of spunk and they're quite feisty, or they're kind of a bit more simpering and sort of like male fantasy kind of figure. I think that Gala Brand and Tiffany Case in the next book are actually my two favorite female Fleming characters. And I don't know for Gala if a part of that is that, she is an agent and she's, doing her own thing as well as Bond. And I like where they go with Bond is obviously really into her. And then, of course, at the end of the book, spoilers, she's actually engaged to somebody else. She's got a fiance and Bond is left on his own, like in quite a sad state. And so I like that they do that with her. I mean, I only reread the book recently, and if, I'm not sure if I've got that many adjectives to describe her character, beyond which I don't know if that's indicative of kind of, maybe I'm being too harsh. I don't know what everyone else thinks.
She's the least problematic, I guess, of any of Fleming's Bond girls. Because when you read one of Fleming's books, you have to be a little bit apologetic towards his attitudes towards women, because you have to say, well, look, it was written way back when, attitudes were different back then. Not that excuses it, but it's just something that I think you got to do when you read these books. With Gala Brand, I think that after you finish reading it, that ending where she's engaged, she has a life, she's not falling head over heels in love with Bond, Bond isn't using her like that. You walk away from the book thinking, she's a fantastic character. She's got such agency about her. She's so different. She stands out from all the rest of the Bond girls. But then when you go back and reread the book, you see that, Fleming hasn't really fleshed out all that much. It's just that ending, I think, that really makes her memorable and really makes her stand out.
Yeah,
I think she's a great character, and I think she as you're saying, Thomas, she's also an agent, and you see some of her spycraft when she takes the book out of the book with all the information. You get into the spycraft where she touches him harder on one spot so that to redirect him and take out the book with the other. She's the one who solves this. She's the one who says, "Oh, let's change the coordinates. Let's do that." She's driving the plot. She really comes to save the day. Now, I think she's a great, as it relates. So there's two things going on. One, she's a great character because she has all this agency and she's spycraft and saves the day. And the other is how Bond sees her. What's funny is that he becomes head over heels over her, and he imagines in the last chapter, what they're going to do together and their life together over the next month. And even M is like matchmaking for them. And she's like, what? She doesn't, this all happened in Bond's head. He created this whole fantasy of what this life was going to be like with her. And she's like, oh, no, I'm engaged.
Mark, I agree totally. In fact, I think, and I'm going to be painted as a misogynistic dinosaur from a different era, but I'll say Fleming gets a bad rap because I think in his first book and this third book, he paints the women as kind of having the upper hand. And I know what you're going to say. Vesper committed suicide. What do you mean? But Bond was the broken man here. Bond, he was like, huh? You have somebody with you. And Willie Rio on the chat has a great point. The fact that she says, hang on, you can do something better than blow yourself up. Bond was going to commit suicide. I mean, for all the right reasons, it's very British, but he was still going to blow himself up. It was her, interest and her spycraft and her thinking, something, I bet you we could be a little bit more creative and resourceful. Back in the 1950s, that was incredibly forward thinking to paint a character like that. And that whole thing with the book, I mean, it was very tense with, Kreb. I want to make sure that I say these things right because everybody's like, it's David, it's Gala. But to me, that was for the 1950s incredibly innovative for the day. I've said it.
And yeah, I think I got this from Some Kind of Hero where they were in Die Another Day, they were going to use Gala Brand, and then they changed the character so much that they're like, we're just going to change the name. We refuse to use this Gala Brand. They'll eventually use her. She's a great character. But so it's going to have to end with, heartbreak on Bond's part.
Miranda Frost was originally going to be Rosamunda Pike was even said in her the very first screenplay script, her character was Gala Brand. And then they changed it to Miranda Frost for Die Another Day.
As soon as they turned that character into a traitor and had her work for Gustav Graves, they just could not use Gala Brand. I mean, how heartbroken would we be as fans if that happened?
So are we saying
character assassination, I think.
Are we saying that Madeline in No Time to Die is Gala Brand?
Can we not talk about anything in No Time to Die? I've walked out of when movie theaters were open. I walked out of the trailer 3 times. I left my son and he watched it, but I ran out of. I don't even want to know the title. Is it No Time to Die?
Who hurt you?
Who hurt you, Mark? You're a brave man.
Mark, show me on the puppet where they hurt you.
I want to go in completely cold.
Okay, go in cold. I like it. All right, I have to ask a question.
Best of luck.
You shouldn't be watching this channel, that's for sure, or Calvin's. But one of the things I want to talk about, Calvin, we're going to start with you because you love a good henchman. I know you do, Jaws, etc. Krebs. I mean, Krebs is an interesting character. There's a couple interesting henchmen. What do you think about the henchmen in this book?
I kind of love it. I mean, I love when they're all sort of introduced as like Drax has his kind of posse of like all these mustached men, which is like one of those things that like, if you put that in a film, it would be so silly. Like, could you imagine like on screen, like all of these men with all these different mustaches? But in the book, it manages to read almost like it's like a silly concept, but it reads like very seriously, and Bond is just intrigued by this really curious detail that all of these henchmen have this sort of like uniform. But yeah, no, I think it's a good bunch of supporting villains in this one. I like most of the characters in it, all of them pretty much. Some highlights.
The whole thing of the henchmen looking so uniform is very kind of a Roald Dahl-ism, really, more than anything else, isn't it? You can imagine Charlie Chaplin or Willy Wonka doing something like that.
Oompa Loompas, right?
Yeah.
Like Oompa Loompa, but bald and German and with mustache.
Does anyone know he used?
I'm working on rockets.
Rosa Klebs or Krebs? Rosa Klebs. Never mind.
What was your question?
Rosa Klebs.
Question withdrawn.
Oh, wow. You know, this is live. I don't think you can do that. We can't edit this out. Mark, what about you? What did you think of the henchman? I mean, Klebs gets his, literally gets his kicks from Bond. He gets smacked around, but, he does play some interesting parts, even in, catching Gala. I mean, he's a little bit of a nefarious character. Is he fleshed out well as an author?
I think that there's sort of I like the idea of the persuader. It's such the idea of him as being just like this very lethal interrogator is a very good idea. We don't, and Bond sort of cuts him off before he does it, because he doesn't want to hurt Gala. So he's like, no, don't torture her. And so we don't really get the full impact of his skills as the persuader. But it was an interesting character and a great name, and Klebs reminded me of Krebs.
The blowtorch scene. It's so great to go back to these books, and I've got to give a plug for Ian Fleming like he needs it. But to go back to these books and reread them after so many years, because I forgot all of that. And I was very tense because I had forgotten that the blowtorch wasn't used on her or him. And I thought, oh my gosh, she's going to get disfigured because, Fleming loves to disfigure women. But thankfully that did not happen.
It's sadistic, isn't it? Fleming just had this wild imagination when it came to torture scenes, like no other author, really.
Yeah. By the way, we've got an interesting question from the panel from Shamir. And Shamir, and we're going to go with you, Calvin. We're going to start with you. And everybody get ready for this because we're all going to handle this question. This is a little bit of fun. So when you think about Gala Brand and even Leola Ponsonby, but let's start with Gala Brand. If you were casting the movie today, who would you cast as Gala Brand?
Ooh. Oh, God.
I like that question.
That is a really good question. And I don't know if I am just influenced by Dine of the Day and like the conversation we were just having, but honestly, Rosamund Pike, I think would be fantastic. Like to come back and play Gala Brand would be quite perfect. Because I do think you need someone, I don't know if maybe you'd need to update it so the character isn't quite so reserved or introverted, I don't know, but I think Rosamund Pike does that kind of, that traditional English rose sort of a woman very well. God, yeah, I'd probably go for her.
I love that pick. Who is the actress who was the dark-haired actress in Captain America that played Agent
Harry Atwell? Yeah,
I think she would be perfect.
Yeah, or Rebecca Ferguson. Rebecca Ferguson, she's in the Mission Impossible films.
Thomas, I mean, you're in the business, man. Who are you casting for this role?
Yeah, well, in my mind, first of all, you've got to cast the Bond, and you've got to match the right actor to the Bond. And I think that there's two opportunities in the history of the franchise where they could have done a cracking Moonraker adaptation, and that would have been just after From Russia with Love with Connery. So it would slot in after From Russia with Love, just before Goldfinger, because once the movies hit Goldfinger and Guy Hamilton comes in, they take off in a way that just completely leaves all of Fleming's work behind. So if you wanted to get a Connery Moonraker in, that would have been the time to do it. And then the other option that they could have had would have been a Peter Hunt, George Lazenby Moonraker. Because Peter Hunt was so devoted to being so true to Fleming's work, and you can see that with his version of Majesty's Secret Service. I think that a Lazenby, down to earth, Peter Hunt movie adaptation would have been absolutely spectacular. I almost wish we had that instead of a Lazenby Diamonds, but I think that yeah, you'd want to pick an actress for Gala Brand during one of those two time periods, either early 60s Connery or early 70s with Lazenby.
By the way, Cal, as you're talking about this and you're having, your answer is so professional and so good. Calvin's thinking still, who would play Dolly? He can't get it out of his mind. Who, and did she have braces? He's having issues. By the way, on the chat room, there's some great discussions and great questions that are really flying high. Not Perfected Yet has a very interesting one, kind of wavers off a little bit, but it is a little bit of speculation. And Mark, we're going to go to you first. Do you think that if Fleming had made Moonraker into a script, would he have focused more on screenplays than novels from then? And would it have meant he would have never worked with McClory or written the other novels? What do you think? Would it have diverted him along a different path?
If he focused more on scripts instead of novels?
Yeah, and screenplays.
I think, I mean, I think his true talent was in novels. You know, it was in the descriptions. It's not that he would always come up with like one central idea. You know, that was just perfect. You know, Casino Royale, where they have to bankrupt the enemy. That's just a great idea. A screenwriter would never come up with that sort of internal idea where you bankrupt the enemy. Although in Moonraker, that car chase with the newspaper rolls feels more like a filmic idea because it's so over the top, you know, throwing newspaper rolls to get the car more than novels. But it's like when you think you could condense these stories in. So Dynamite does comics and where they do the adaptations and they're like 128 pages for the first two. But there was this guy named German Gabler who did 59 comics in Chile. And one of the ones he did was Moonraker, and he changed it to Sabotage. And I was really going to say this for adaptations, but when Thomas brought up Sean Connery in Moonraker, can you see this? This is his.
Oh, that's cool.
So this is what Sean Connery in Moonraker could have been like. Wow. And this is a 34-page comic, including the cover and the end, and a 3-page pre-title sequence, and has nothing to do with the plot. So he reduced this whole story into like 30 pages. So there's not necessarily a lot of plot. It's all of these wonderful descriptions, and also saving for adaptations. Like when you listen to these on tape, and there's so many wonderful audiobooks of this, they're like 7 hours and 20 minutes. But the one that Rufus Sewell does, is that how you say his name?
Yeah.
Dark.
Yeah, okay.
Is like 2.5 hours. And so you just get rid of the descriptions. They get rid of like these tangents that don't drive the story forward to tell Moonraker in 2.5 hours or 3 hours when it really should be 7 hours and 20 minutes of spoken word. So what we love about what many of us love about Fleming is his way he tells the story. So I'm glad that he kept all this to bring around to the original answer. His novel seems to be a pretty good idea.
Yeah, and Jack Lugo actually mentioned, because, you know, I think he is a study of the history of Fleming. Jack is a journalist himself, and he's studied this and said that his screenplays were not really looked very favorably upon. Like it wasn't his core talent. So maybe he went in the right direction after all. Gang, we need to talk about something because there's a lot of people on here already jumping into this. The lifestyle aspect of Bond in this. When I asked people over the last month, when we announced that we were doing Moonraker, which is kind of obvious because we are going in order, in case you're not catching on, they said it was the lifestyle of Bond. And, you know, one of the things, for example, even little things like there's a quote where, you know, he made love with a rather cold passion, which, by the way, I don't know how you make love without cold passion. I mean, or cold feet. I mean, that's just the way you do it, right? I kid. But I mean, the whole gambling, drinking, all those different things being fleshed out. Calvin, when you think about the Bond lifestyle, I mean, this book really came into fray with this. Did you think that it highlighted it as much as it did?
Oh, certainly did, yeah. And I think it does go back to what we were talking about at the beginning, actually, about those first few chapters where we hear about Bond's routine and all that kind of stuff. And his drinking habits, what he takes to perform certain actions, all those kinds of things. It's certainly not a aspirational lifestyle. I mean, Fleming's Bond isn't,
Not all of it.
No, I mean, smoking like, what is it? Is it 60 or 70?
70.
70, right.
70.
Like, that's a lot. That
seven, I would be throwing up.
Yeah. Well, I know. I don't know how anyone would get out of bed in the morning after so many cigarettes, but yeah, it certainly. I'm trying to sort of contextualize it in the chronology, as it were, being the third book. I seem to remember it was kind of the first book where I kind of thought, obviously in Casino Royale, Vesper's suicide is obviously a real gut punch, and you feel for Bond in that moment, and the torture that he goes through and all this kind of stuff. But there is kind of a bit of a pity, about him and his lifestyle that's, I feel, comes in Moonraker. And I think it's explored later on as we go through the books.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think in Casino and Live and Let Die, he's really treating himself when he's out in the field. He is overindulging in champagne and expensive meals. He's wining and dining himself on the company's money at the best places. But in Moonraker, he's back home. He's in London. He's not out on some glamorous mission traversing the world. So we get to see a little bit more, like the curtain is pulled back a little bit on Bond's private life and his personal life. And like Calvin says, you do feel a little bit of pity for him.
And Thomas, that's a good point, because even when he goes to Blades, I got the sense, at least upon this read, that he was a little bit of, he wanted M to be the Sherpa. He wasn't sitting there all the time proactively ordering. It was really M. Hey, try this, try that, try our house brandy, try this, leading him along, as opposed to Bond asserting himself. Grant McGowan on the chat says Bond's lifestyle is a representation, if you will, of the fact that, and Calvin, this is exactly what you're saying, he's on the edge. I mean, this is a man who's on the edge. Is he on the edge, or is this Ian Fleming's lifestyle? Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, it's hard to know where he was a writer, and so he created, and it's sort of not fair to ascribe every habit or every detail or every preference to Fleming. However,
true.
It's really tempting to. I mean, it really feels like these are the things that either Fleming does or would want to do. It seems like it's Fleming's fantasies. So whether he's actually doing all these things, you could tell he's writing with passion about them, even when he's talking about the negative impact that all this lifestyle has on Bond.
I agree. By the way, damn, I love these names in the chat room, by the way. Some of them are just, iconic. This gentleman's name is Damn Full Idealistic Crusader. Who doesn't want to be that? I mean, there's so many different adjectives there. He has a question. Who recommends trying Benzedrine with champagne? As somebody who works in the pharmaceutical industry, I cannot recommend that. There's something called potentiating effects.
Your carafe of Moonraker?
What's that? Oh, by the way,
you want to try that after your craft?
I don't know if this is if this is an alert to everybody. It's halfway down. It's a cucumber. That's what I hear. People say I would try Benzedrine if I could. Yeah, there are different aspects of Benzedrine. First of all, Benzedrine was an actual thing. There are different forms of it today. This is the pharma guy talking here. But they did use it actually in most of the wars to keep soldiers alert. It's basically speed to keep people more alert. And allegedly, Benzedrine also creates something called ocular acuity. What is that? So ocular acuity is when you can actually, they call it vampire sight. It's basically when you can see detail better than ever before. So if you thought you had good eyesight, it allows you to see detail and your peripheral vision to expand. And that was the highlight. And they don't say this in the book. This is the pharma guy talking, but it is interesting. I mean, if you're a spy and there's a lot at stake in, this type of a match, and you want to really keep alert, and you can't be drunk, but you have to look drunk. It's not something I would recommend, but it's an interesting, it's something from the 1954s. I thought it was a really interesting approach.
Is it legal? I mean, can you get it over a counter? Or
I'll send you some, Calvin. I can read between the lines. I'll send it in your next package. Oh my God. With the 007 chocolate, I'll send it.
Excellent. I can sprinkle it.
You can sprinkle it. A lot of people also did enjoy certain aspects when Bond was with Gala Brand. And, they're doing the swimming and the lifestyle aspects, because it is these little moments where Bond is kind of slowing down and enjoying himself until the cliff falls on them. But is that a typical thing for Fleming to do, is to give everybody a break?
Yeah, I think he likes to indulge every so often in lifestyle aspects and show his characters enjoying themselves, especially in whatever fanciful locale that they're in. And whilst some people on the chat might not think that Dover or the UK is all that exotic, it is a beautiful cinematic looking location. Have you been, Calvin?
Oh yeah, down on the coast, sort of down there with it's quite beautiful. Like it's it's really lovely. And again, like having been there myself, like quite regularly, it's nice and relatable.
Yeah, and
is it relatable that they went
Fleming
swimming?
Gave the characters a chance to enjoy the location.
Is the swimming thing realistic?
When is this set? Is it set in summer? I think, there's like a window of about like 2 months where you could probably go swimming and it be okay. But otherwise, yeah, maybe not.
Yeah, I've been there before and it didn't look very swimmable. But all right, we've got to do something that is naturally happening, and we're going to keep it light, but I think it's important. There has to be, with Moonraker the novel, there has to be comparisons with the movie. For example, Hugo Drax, obviously the name itself. But by the way, Hugo Drax, allegedly, the character was named after Ian Fleming's brother-in-law, which is kind of interesting. But there is some film comparisons. We should kind of go around, and Calvin should be the expert at this, but there is a master race discussion. Hugo Drax in the novel is talking about Nazis and the master race, and Hugo Drax in the film is talking about preserving a master race in space. Calvin, what other similarities could you find between the two?
Well, I think one of the more famous examples is that there is a sequence, with the Bond and the Bond girl are trapped, and they're at danger of being burnt by the rocket fire coming out of obviously it's the space shuttle in the film. Here it's the rocket. There's obviously the name of the villain. Aside from that, and as you mentioned, the talk of like the master race, like that's also a similarity. There's really more in common with Die Another Day, and I know that we touched on that earlier on. I can't take credit for this particular observation, but I think it was the 00 Files podcast that made this observation when I listened to their movie review of Die Another Day. Even like the cliff collapsing in the Moonraker novel, Bond is on that glacier that collapses in Die Another Day. Is that something taken from the novel? I think that's quite interesting. And then obviously we touched on the Die Another Day similarities earlier on as well. I don't know about Moonraker. I don't know if Mark or Thomas know anything more.
Well, I in your tweet the other day, Calvin, you said you love them both so much. They're both your favorite part of Bond media, yet they're so different. I think that's accurate. Moonraker is one of the more outlandish Bond films, and Moonraker novel is one of the most grounded and down to earth. So it's so funny that they went opposite directions from the source material. I'm sorry, Thomas, were you about to say something?
I was just going to add to the Die Another Day comparisons.
Please.
I think that structurally, in the novel of Moonraker is structured quite similarly to Die Another Day. In the novel for Moonraker, you strip Bond of everything that the audience has come to expect from a Bond story. So he is not off on some exciting mission. He's stuck in the office. Slowly, as it goes on, you introduce a few more elements. He goes to the Blades Club. He meets the villain. By the time you get to the end of the story, the last third of the Fleming novel, Fleming has introduced all the tropes that you would come to expect from one of his books. And I think it's the same with the narrative structure of the movie Die Another Day. You strip Bond of everything that you have come to expect from him. He has no MI6. He's abandoned. He's locked up. He's traitor to the country. And then slowly, as the story goes on, he goes to Blades. You reintroduce everything, all the tropes, all the cliches that the audience have come to expect. So I think that there's plenty there in the movie Die Another Day that they've mined from the novel. It's not just Drax's backstory, I guess.
So I'm going to jump in here to defend Moonraker for a moment as far as similarities.
Okay, go for it.
So basically, you've got Hugo Drax, who is that traitor from within. I mean, they go to Hugo Drax, who is seen as a benevolent, individual who's building rockets for everybody. And basically, they have the gas masks on, and they say, "Look, he's clearly a fine individual." And how embarrassing is that for Bond? I think that's very similar.
That's true, actually. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but it's certainly the Minister of Defense is certainly very embarrassed, and it is like,
Right.
yeah, Drax is held up as this public figure. Yeah, I guess the difference is that Bond in the movie seems to be kind of indifferent about him, whereas in the book he's much more of a fan.
By the way, Calvin, you'll appreciate this. I am getting so much grief in the chat room from people that live in London and Britain and who are saying, listen, if it's 1954 and it's in the summer, you can swim in those waters. I get it, folks. I get it.
Yeah.
Yorkshire, places I don't even know.
Oh yeah, no, down near Kent. That's like, that's like going abroad for me these days.
This is an interesting question. Daniel Howes asks, does anyone know if Churchill read Moonraker and what he thought of it? I guess because of the bigness of it, the Britishness. Do we know any of that?
I can't imagine he would have read it. Anyone else agree?
He would
Don't
walk
think-
away from it, right?
Yeah, I can't imagine he'd be into spy fiction like that,
Well,
yeah, I can't imagine him being into fiction.
I know.
Yeah,
By the way, I want to move to
I think
something
he had
that
enough on his plate to be reading Bond.
exactly. He had a couple of wars to diminish. Mark, we want to talk to you a little bit about what happens after the novel comes out, besides us in 2020 on October 24th, reading and getting together. There's obviously some things that happen in a very interesting way, radio shows, etc. Can you kind of let us in on those things?
Okay, this is literally, so I had this obsession, which was, to me, there was this like urban myth, a Bond urban myth about the Bond radio play that was performed live in the 50s. First of all, it was never, people didn't know if it existed. There was no recording. So there was this weird idea, live radio show, Moonraker in the 50s. Nobody knew the date. And because there's no recording of it, we didn't know if it existed. But it was mentioned on chat boards. So someone on a chat board who went by the name of Silhouette Man wrote the actor / game show host Bob Holness and asked him all the questions you'd want to ask him. Can you tell us how you got the part? What was it? What was the deal? And he wrote this man back who went by the name Silhouette Man. I wrote this guy Silhouette Man who wrote me back and shared the letter. He kept the copy that of the letter that Bob Holness shared with him and let me reproduce it in the book. And it's fascinating because it provided context for why there was a live radio show. So the South African Broadcasting Company used to do weekly shows from all sorts, including like soap operas. And one of the many things that they did in the late 50s was Moonraker. And but Bob wrote to Brian, who's the guy's name, who runs a website called the Bondologist blog. He said, "I'm sorry, I don't remember the date of when it took place, but he did confirm that it wasn't recorded." So I contacted his family, and they just stumbled upon his contract. I'm sorry, I'm telling this badly because I'm so excited. I apologize for that. So they stumbled upon the contract that he signed and the contract, which I'm going to hold up. So this is the contract for the second Bond.
Whoa.
You see that? And it says that he had 2 rehearsals and 1 live performance. He was paid £11, and the performance went from 7:30 p.m. to 9 p.m. So it was 90 minutes, and it took place on January 30th, 1958. So this proves that the thing did take place. I'm sorry, I tell it so much better in the book. I was just so excited because it just makes me so happy to have had this weird obsession about this radio show that there's no proof that it existed, and to put it in some context.
So it was actually never done, the radio show.
So it was done.
Oh, it was
done live, but no one ever recorded it.
Oh.
Because they didn't think there was any value in recording these things and preserving them. And there was talk of doing another one, but and they tried to pursue the rights for it. South African Broadcasting Company did this the Moonraker radio play that few people know about. Yeah. So
by the way, what I find fascinating about Moonraker and this, I mean, we're here talking about a book, but there have been so much lore and legend. I mean, you're talking about what you talked about. I do know that in the 1950s, they were going to have a Moonraker film way before, obviously, the Roger Moore one that was being kind of fleshed out. They obviously had the comic strip. They've got the one, the Calvin Dyson authorized, movie version with Roger Moore. I mean, there's so much bigger lore around here. And by the way, just to kind of finish off the Winston Churchill, to pay him deference, Jonathan S. says Fleming gave a copy of Live and Let Die to Churchill. He dedicated it to Sir Winston Churchill, from whom I stole some words from the author.
Oh my God.
So there's the Winston Churchill. By the way, you put a couple hundred people in the chat room, somebody's going to know the answer.
Yeah.
So how do we, Mark,
That's the great thing about
that's got to be your next holy grail, is to find a recording of this somewhere.
No, I don't. So it doesn't exist. I'm confident that it doesn't exist.
Okay.
He said it didn't
the
exist.
closest thing you'd have, Mark, would be a script.
Right. I've searched.
If anything exists.
That, and Bob Holness's daughter spoke to the producers, and she tried to get information, and she doesn't think that it existed either. They just didn't. They just never recorded those particular shows. I would love to get a script. I do have one. I've got something we can talk about it another time. But in November, I've got 2 more Holy Grail things that move Bond lore forward. But yeah, but I would love to find the script.
Wait, you're going to tease us? You're going to tease us with that and not give us a further clue?
Yeah, that's like that. But can I tell you? Do one more weird adaptation of Moonraker?
Yes,
absolutely.
Okay, this is the Moonraker read-along book. I'm going to hit play.
Hi, everybody. This is your James Bond read-along book. Every time you hear this sound, it means that it's time to turn the page in your storybook. Now we're just about ready to begin. Moonraker. And
What
remember,
the hell?
turn the page every time you hear the sound.
I'll give you one or 2 lines, and I'll turn it off.
so cool.
Mr. Bond, we meet again, and for the last time, since you have only just regained consciousness. I must tell you that you are in the exhaust pit directly under my starship. Moonraker, my short.
So cool, right?
That's
What
awesome.
Is that a
living
tie-in for the
F
movie?
is this?
It's a little not a pamphlet. It's a short little children's book.
You don't understand. Calvin Dyson and I are going to fight in a ring of death to own this. What is this thing?
It's a read along book. And so when he hits beep, you turn the page, and there were a few of them, and that's one of them. I just love that, and it picks up at the end.
That's
Wait,
awesome.
Pages are there.
Yeah,
Can you
exactly.
imagine having to listen to that sound effect?
It's pretty great, right?
If it was a 200-page book.
Thomas, that's my new phone ring. What are you talking about? That's insane.
And for children.
Yeah,
It-
because
Wow.
children love.
so
Children love Benzedrine.
I was just going to say, Bond took champagne and whiskey in a Hague, and kids, go to your parents' liquor cabinet, open it up, and drink liberally. What the heck?
Mark, is that an adaptation of the Fleming?
No, that's of the film. Yeah, of the.
Oh.
Yeah. That's recent. I mean, not recent. That's it's not 1950s.
By the way, there's some people that know me so well. Tim Hans says Zaritsky's going to want to get this for his collection. I'm already on eBay. I'm multitasking. Let the bidding begin, he says. I love it. So, all right, we have to step back for a moment because Thomas, Mark, and Calvin, one of the things is we had a lot of people reading this particular book, and I want to always step back and look at it as a whole, because what we've done is we've splintered this book, which is unfair in a way. We've talked about characters, we've talked about adaptations, we talked about plot, we've talked about lifestyle. As a whole, when you measure this up to everything in all of Fleming's work, what's your takeaway with this? Because a lot of people are like, oh, this is my favorite. It's all downhill from here. I mean, what's kind of your overview? And Mark, I'm going to let you go first, but give us kind of the overview of this experience that you had this past month.
It's great. I had so much fun revisiting the book. I did it. First, I read the book, and then I listened to two different audio tapes of it, the full one and the short one. I really loved it. And what I love about it is Fleming's writing. And I know he's really down on himself. There's this auction coming up, and he inscribed one of his books. I don't know which one, and he inscribed it read and burn, which is a very self-effacing thing to say, saying my work is not good. But it is so good, and it's the reason why we're all talking about it. And he really worked his butt off to make it good. And he would write and he would rewrite. The original, if you go to the library, the original manuscript has him taking lunch at a restaurant, and he changed it to handwrote, and he wrote in the canteen. It was a great change because it brought his day-to-day work more vividly to life by having Bond eat lunch in the canteen as opposed to some restaurant that we don't know the name of. And in the end, Bond and Gala originally went off together, and in one iteration, and he changed it. So one of the defining parts of this book is that Bond doesn't get the woman at the end, but that wasn't always the case, and it's just an example of Fleming going back and perfecting.
I love that, by the way. I mean, and by the way, I didn't know that last part, so thank you for adding that. Thomas is someone that produces and makes movies. It can be argued, but probably the argument would be lost that the writing itself certainly has got to be the foundation for everything that you do. Definitely, when you transcribe that to film. As you reread or re-experienced Moonraker, what were your big takeaways?
I think the biggest takeaway is that it's aged the best out of all of Fleming's work. I think that, as much as I love all of Fleming's novels, you have to admit that there are some dated cultural commentaries, I guess. But with Moonraker, it's aged the best. I think it's a little bit ahead of its time, even though it's from the 50s. I think that the writing is so tight. I think we get into every single character's head. We understand where Bond is coming from. We understand where Gala is coming from, where Drax is coming from. We get a clear grasp of their motivations, what's propelling them throughout the story. I think it just makes for a more engaging read. And the whole thing is just such a potboiler. It builds and builds and builds. The tension really, really ratchets up as the story goes along. And I think it's such a fascinating ride for the reader. So I think the writing on this is flawless, absolutely amazing. And I was so surprised to see just how well it stands up.
Yeah, it's high praise, but I mean, I walked away the same way as you, where I really saw the Bond formula here, and I saw the tightness of it. When I think about even the best Bond films and how we translate those, I saw the different tropes and the different approaches. And Calvin, before you give your answer, one of the things I want to be very transparent with the audience today, or whenever you're watching this, is that I had asked Calvin to come on to these, and he said, "Listen, keep my powder dry until Moonraker. I really want to talk about Moonraker." So there must have been a reason. First of all, what was that reason, and did the reason pay off?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Like I've been wanting to revisit this because I've only come to reading the Flemings in their entirety quite late. I went through them all 2 years, about a year and a half ago, something like that. And I'd read Casino Royale and From Russia with Love before, but I was going back to them. And this is the one where I was like, I'm kind of lukewarm on Casino Royale and Live and Let Die, but then reading Moonraker, it was just this exhilarating, fun adventure. I think just like Thomas said, it's kind of, it's some of it's kind of boilerplate kind of stuff, but I like that. And I like that it is just kind of a straight down the line adventure. Like my other favorite one is Dr. No, which I like for similar reasons. I think it's a really well constructed, really tight, fun adventure that you go on the mission, and they're dealing with very serious themes. Like, don't get me wrong, and some of the darkness, the elements of Bond's lifestyle are quite dark. Obviously there's high stakes and all that kind of stuff, but it's just a really good fun thriller, and that's what I kind of enjoy out of these. I mean, obviously I love the film. It has nothing to do with the film, but almost. But I just had an awful lot of fun reading it, and I really enjoyed coming back to it this time. I've been doing a bit of a John Gardner reading challenge myself recently, which has been on a bit of a hiatus. So reading this again really got me back into the swing of things. So yeah, I appreciate that. So thank you for organizing this, David.
It's really interesting that you bring up Gardner, because I feel that Moonraker is so influential to all the continuation authors. I think that each one of them sort of references Moonraker in some way. Gardner starts off with Bond buying a little cottage for himself, and he sort of goes down that road of Bond's personal life, what he's doing when he's not on active service. I think that some of the villains as well, with Sebastian Fawkes and Devil May Care, and Anthony Horowitz with Trigger Mortis, they have villains who sort of echo Drax with the sort of the motivation to destroy England. They were betrayed by England. They have this sort of shady past where they were betrayed, and now they're looking for revenge. So I think that a lot of the continuation novels have echoes of Moonraker. Moonraker is probably the most influential Fleming book.
It is quite a template sort of adventure, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which I probably quite like it for that. And I just think we haven't talked about the one of the climactic chapters, really, where the missiles going off and you have the BBC reporter kind of like talking things through, and it's a really Mark, everything that you said about it originally being a television or film treatment, it suddenly made sense, because that whole ending is so filmic, like with the the countdown and all that kind of stuff. It really does read like that, but I love that. I think it's really nice. And I just want to give a shout out as well to the James Bond and Moonraker, the Christopher Wood novelization. If you do want the book of the film, this is it. I think you can get it on eBay quite cheap. But this is sort of like the novelization of the screenplay of the film based on the book that has nothing to do with the book. So it's But it's,
Christopher
it's
Wood was great at sort of bridging the outlandish movie version with Fleming's grounded reality.
yeah, I
He
agree.
did such
Oh,
a good
wow.
job
There
with
it is. Calvin, a couple people are asking, and I think it's a worthy question. In reading this book, and clearly there was an approach, at least in this particular one from Fleming, of a pride in Britain. Did you feel that pride swell up more?
In a weird way, yes. And
Yeah, no, that's not weird.
no, well, it's kind of this like quiet sort of, it's very British in a way, or old school British anyway. It's not terribly kind of flag waving or anything like that. It's just very kind of internal and resolve and stubbornness and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, no, I do like it in that regard.
So this is going to not be very popular, or maybe it's dead on. But I find that the British pride is something that when you pry the pride out of somebody, it's there, but you have to pry it out. So even that question, it's not something you're going to proactively share, but it is something that's there. And once it's pulled out, it's obvious.
That's a really good observation, actually. I agree with that. Yeah.
You know what it is? I have too many, not too many, but I have a lot of friends overseas in Europe. Thank goodness. Thank goodness. Gentlemen, one of the things I do want to talk about is something that is related, but somewhat a little bit different while we have an audience to this. And that is the fact that one of the things that I've always talked about, people like Ian Fleming, who I consider a creator, he creates stories. He initially started to create novels because he felt like he had to. Maybe it was his therapy, if you will. But one of the things that I've done consistently is I always get panelists that are creators. And I love the fact that the three of you have continued. And yes, Mark, sorry to turn this knife a little bit into your stomach. You continue to create even when we've had a little bit of a black hole, a little bit of a hiatus. I would like to talk about what you're all creating, or what you have created that satiates us in the beginning. So Mark, talk to me about kind of like what do you feel like you've created to really kind of keep our appetites a little bit wet? Call it your projects, if you will.
I have an upcoming project that I'm told will be November related. That goes into some of the lost adventures of our favorite secret agent that might cover, I'm told, Dalton's third Bond film.
What? Dude, you are being so subterfuge. I love this.
I'm told that it will go into James Bond Jr. and
nice.
solve a long-standing Bond literary mystery.
What?
That's what I'm told.
Wait, is this
Can't
something that
confirm
we're
nor
all
deny.
going to be able to publicly consume? I love the pause.
Oh,
I love the pause.
There was a little tease there. There was a
Yeah.
So I hope to have more information to share in November.
That is absolutely the legalese lawyer way to say it. Good for you.
Well, if it's anything like this, I can't wait.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you.
Mark, are you going to be able to share it with us eventually?
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure. In November, I will talk a lot about it if you'll have me.
Before Thanksgiving?
Yeah.
Then you're not talking turkey. Thank you.
Nice.
That was horrible. That was a dad joke. Boy, did I show my age. By the way, so before we started all this, everybody, Calvin and Thomas just did it, showed up their books. We're all fans of Mark's. He wrote this book that is, I will say, I know you described it in the beginning. It's so unique because it literally is all these different aspects of people who have
Hold it up for a
portrayed.
second. That should be my new screenshot. Hold it up. Do that one more time.
Yeah.
So,
You
thank
gotta like screen grab that.
I'm gonna screen grab that. I'd love that. Thank you. It's just so nice to see it because you don't get to see people reading your book. You don't get to see people holding your book. You you write it in your house, sometimes late at night, sometimes early in the morning, sometimes in 15-minute increments when you have a moment. So it's so wonderful. It fills me with such joy to see that. So thank you.
As
By the
a
way, a
Bond
ton
fan,
of
all my
people.
life,
Oh, go ahead, Tom.
I felt like I knew everything there was to know about Bond, and then this book comes out, The Many Lives of James Bond, and oh my God, Mark, you are like the Indiana Jones of the James Bond world, just unearthing all these treasures. It's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, there's so much, if you look beyond just the films and the novels, and there's all this great stuff, the Many Lives of James Bond. It's Sean Connery's video game performance as James Bond. It's the behind the scenes stories of that. It's interviews with two actors who played Bond on the radio. It's the guy who played James Bond on James Bond Jr., but it's also the guy who was the dancing 007 at the Oscars.
The Oscars.
Yes.
Tribute to Albert R. Broccoli. So it's all these people who are Bond who we just don't think of as Bond, but they're Bond.
By the way, I have to tell you, what I love about even this discussion in and of itself is that the creativity. I've always said that Bond fans make the best content creators because they understand what we think and what we love. And, Thomas, I have to move to you because, obviously, you've got a great love and penchant for James Bond, but, there's a potential, I'm sure, as a James Bond fan to use those different tropes and love within your own work, I would assume.
Absolutely, yeah. As a director, I always find it's best to find an actor who is well versed with James Bond, so I can use shorthand with them. I found that even with my last short film, we needed a very quick setup for a very quick shot, and I was talking to my cinematographer, and I said, that opening shot in Skyfall when Daniel Craig just walks into the light and you see his eyes comes from the shadow? And he's like, yeah. I said, can we do something like that? He goes, no problem. 20 minutes later, the lights were set up. That's all I had to do. So I think Bond is just such a great shorthand.
So Thomas, when you're directing me as a Russian mob boss, which you've told me that's my role, I assume you're going to use that type of vernacular.
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. I'm looking forward.
See, Thomas thinks I'm kidding, but I will risk getting on a plane to be in your. What is your next film?
My next film is a dance comedy called Fred and Ginger, about two disadvantaged Irish teenagers who try to enter a dance competition, win the prize money, and run away and become famous dancers. I feel like that's my life story. Not only do I not know dance, not only am I not Irish, but and not only am I not a teenager, but I don't have any connection to that whatsoever. But I can play the guy that cleans up in the background. You're in. I'll write a role in it for you.
I see David as kind of like a dance instructor. Like he's really tough, but he's got a heart of gold kind of thing. I think that's the role for him.
You know something, Calvin? That's exactly how my coworkers describe me. A dance instructor with a heart of gold. Calvin, what about you? Calvin, you have been, and I want to give, because this guy's not going to do it because he is from Britain. You have been literally coming out with so much content during a time when, as Mark aptly put it, it is a very freakish time. Delays, question marks, Apple, Netflix, who knows? But one thing, to use a Bondition as far as GoldenEye, one thing you can always count on is Calvin Dyson, and you've come up with some amazing things. Are you going to continue with that type of trajectory?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, there's certainly since lockdown, I guess, March, and even before that, because we were kind of building up to what we thought was going to be the release of No Time to Die in, April or whatever. But no, I mean, it's been my escape. I think Bond, escapism is just built into the formula of certainly the films. And it's fun for me to just escape. And, whether it's writing or editing or just watching the films, playing the games, all that kind of stuff. It's as much my escape as it might be for anyone else watching it. But there's plenty of stuff in the pipeline. Big old For Your Eyes Only review coming up. Like those videos are going like an hour long now, but it's fun to do. I do really like it. I've been working on it most of the day. So
I love your deleted scenes, by the way. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, Calvin, you write it out in advance, right? You're not speaking extemporaneously, even though you look like you're speaking extemporaneously. Is that
well, in some of them, like the deleted scenes ones, for example, that's not scripted. Yeah. But for like the main sort of film reviews or game reviews or something, like generally, if it's me sat at this desk, it's normally sort of candid. Whereas if it's me in front of the posters, it's scripted.
Yeah, they're so great.
Oh, thank you. And I have to thank, if I can just give another shout out to Mark's book, because I'm a big Bond video game geek, and me and Mark have exchanged messages about the various actors that have played Bond. But this book does correct a lot of sort of contradictory and misinformation and stuff online. So this is really something of a Bible. I come to this for reference like quite a bit. So
that's nice, thank you. And I also want to say that, you know, David and Calvin and James Bond Radio and all these other people who are making all this Bond content during this time, being James Bond, 00 Files, there's such wonderful distractions. When I go out, you know, you're home all day working, and then you put on like your podcast and you walk around the neighborhood. It's such a nice way to sort of decompress from the stressors of life. And so all those content creators, I think they're all doing mitzvahs. And the Bond community, I think, has been so. Before I published my book, I was very scared because everyone's an expert. Like everyone on this chat here knows, you know, could all write their own book or do their own podcast. There's sort of no casual Bond fans that I've encountered. They're all experts, and the whole community has been so supportive and so kind to each other, from my point of view. And so it's wonderful to witness, I think.
I always attribute the Bond community as like Ivory soap. It's 99.9% pure. 99.9% of them are just phenomenal people. And when you compare them to some of the other franchises or hobbies, it is huge. They really are for each other. And first of all, Mark, thank you for saying that. That is extremely gracious, but we're hoping for that, because it's interesting. I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but the way these things come about are very organic and they're very friendly. I'll give you a perfect example and a peek behind the curtain, if you will. But, you know, I wanted to do a defense for Quantum of Solace. I love the movie. And I'm not going to get into detail, but I basically reached out to Calvin and said, hey, I don't think you like this movie, do you? And he's like, I'm not a fan. And I said, great, you're going to be my foil. And we're going to get on the Skype for an hour, and we're going to chat about Quantum. And he's like, I'm in. That's how these things happen. This doesn't go through a Bond Bible. There's no attorneys. There's no contracts. You know, and I think that's one of the things why the Bond community is so pure, is because unlike our friends on the brands of Bond, there isn't a lot of litigation and discussion around this. Is this going to be a fun conversation? And most of all, do we want to have this? I mean, this Bond book club is a result of people wanting to have these conversations. There's no one paying us. There's nobody making us do this. It's because we want to spend 2 hours chatting with our friends. And it's just very authentic, I think.
I think it's been so great having the three of you guys here as a fan of all three of you, and being James Bond Radio, the 00 Files, all the great people in the community, has been such a great way to keep the anticipation up for No Time to Die as well. Because every time a new Bond movie starts to come out, it's like jumping on board a fast-moving train, and you're just barreling forwards towards the release of the movie. And then as soon as that delay happened in March, it felt like the train was going to go off a cliff. And I was struggling to kind of lay down track in front of the train as it was still moving. So you're looking for ways to distract yourself from that and keep the anticipation levels up and the excitement up. And turning to The Many Lives of James Bond, watching Calvin's YouTube channel, watching David's YouTube channel, listening to all the fantastic podcasts, has just been a way to just keep the fandom soaring, absolutely soaring. And when it was delayed again a few weeks ago, you know, it didn't hurt. It didn't bother me as much, because I was just looking forward to seeing what you guys were going to say about it. And it's been an absolutely fantastic thing. So thanks very much.
Well, thank you. And I know this is a sore subject for Mark, which that's why I keep bringing it up, because it is a sore subject for Mark. But I think that the delay of the movie until 2022 is palatable. That was a little bit of a dig for Mark. Because
2020 what?
mark my words, folks, mark my words, because we are creating these things. I did a video, gosh, yesterday, where I talked about the week in review. And there were so many people that were coming to me and saying a couple weeks ago, you know what, I've had it. I'm putting Bond in a box. I'm going to focus on pizza. I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to focus on that. And I'm not seeing it, because people will let Bond be their Sherpa in this. And it's not, and believe me, this does not win any favors with Eon, I'm sure. It's not No Time to Die as a movie, or putting butts in seats in theaters, or Apple or Netflix, whoever wins that debate. It is about the fact that we can all share in something common. And then once we get that commonality, we then reach a different plateau where we're just friends. We're connecting on so many other things other than Bond. That's the magic here. And we've proven it over the last 2 hours. So, guys, I want to thank you for everything that you've done. I want to thank everybody watching for everything you've connected on. And I've got some really good news that I want to announce. So you all ready for an announcement?
Yes.
Yeah, go on.
I love that dramatic pause. Look, Calvin's like, yeah, whatever.
We're
Whatever,
all sat
Dave.
down.
This is so obvious. So the Bond book club will return in Diamonds Are Forever.
Nice.
Oh.
So we'll see if that
can't wait.
holds up, and we'll see who the panelists are. I'm sure they'll bring their own aspect to the table. But I do want to thank Calvin, Mark, and Thomas for really keeping the conversation going. Believe me, you don't want to hear me for 2 hours. And thank everybody for joining us. And we'll talk to you all real soon. Everybody, take care out there.
Be well, everyone.
See ya.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right, hold. Everybody on the Zoom, hold for a second. Let me check everything.